Chapter 30. Drew didn't know how much time she spent there on the floor of the bedroom. She didn't care, didn't feel anything at all except that grief that welled up inside of her and threatened to consume her completely. After a time, she realized that something was different. Nothing in the place looked different, but it all felt different somehow. She got up and looked around. She could still feel her father's presence in the room, but it wasn't as strong as it had been. She began to feel small changes around the place, changes that made it a little more comfortable for her. She found the key ring in the dresser drawer where her father always kept it, all of the keys dangling from it, and she stared at them, remembering seeing her father put the key ring in his pocket before they'd left. Part of the legacy, she thought. She hoped that wasn't all of it. She felt like she was going to need a lot of help. There was a quiet knock, and Drew knew who it was, but didn't know how she knew. "Lala, come in," she said. The door opened and the Inkling stood there. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Lala said. "How did you know?" Drew asked. "We Inklings are made to serve the Sorcerer, and we know who that is without being told. We know now that this is you. This can only mean that your father has died." Drew sighed, hearing tears still unshed in the sound of her breath. "Do you have any instructions for me, ma'am?" Lala asked. "Lala, has anyone ever approached you and asked you to betray my father?" Drew asked. "No, ma'am," Lala said, shaking her head, and Drew wished James were there so he could tell if the Inkling was lying. "My loyalty is beyond question. No one would ask me to be part of any conspiracy. They know I wouldn't join it, ma'am." "Okay," Drew said. "Thank you. You can go now. I'll call you when I need you." "Thank you, ma'am." Lala curtsied, turning and leaving, and Drew reflected that she didn't know where the Inkling went when she wasn't actually working. Did she live at Margincourt? Nearby? Did she live in another world and travel to and from it somehow? She decided to let that mystery wait a while longer. She left the room, closing and locking the door behind her. She found the nearest stairwell and went down it, not bothering to create any light, either using her power or torch, going round and round and down in the darkness until she reached the landing she needed. It had been a long time since she'd seen the corridor behind the door to that landing, but she remembered it well. Here she did create a faint glowing orb to go in front of her to cast a dim illumination on the walls as she walked to the big chamber at the end of the corridor. She stood in the doorway, the orb going inside. She stepped over the threshold and stood on the ledge, and she could hear and feel the Goloff there in the darkness as he leaned over her. She heard him sniffing, heard the clinking of the chains. "I'm so sorry," the Goloff said in his gentle, whispery voice, and those eyes appeared again. "You know it too?" Drew asked. "Yes. He died in service to his duty." Drew felt the tears start finally, and she sank to the floor on her knees, weeping and feeling the Goloff's empathy and understanding, letting it wash over her as the creature said nothing, just letting her feel her grief. "I didn't know what else to do," she finally said. "We didn't know any other way out." "You did what you must. I would say that you should not feel guilt, but you must feel guilt, even if you have done nothing wrong. Such is the way of you and your people." "But I didn't know what to do. Imhotep answered my questions, but I don't understand what he meant," Drew said. "What did you ask? And what did Imhotep say in answer?" the Goloff said. "I asked him where Penny is, and he said I should look for him at the end of the path." "What else?" "That the next time I saw him, he'd lie, and what he lied about would be what I'd need to destroy him, and anybody I brought along to help me would die." "What else?" "That there was a question that I needed to ask but didn't know it, and the answer to that one was yes, that I should be patient. Ah, the girl off stood, and she could almost see the scarred hands with the long fingernails stroking the thing's chin as it thought. This is hopeful, at least. How? Drew asked. It didn't say if you encountered him again, but when. Imhotep knows all things. That means you'll find him. But I've got to figure out what he meant by the end of the path, Drew said. What road do you travel? The Goloff asked. I don't know. I don't travel any path. Wait. She stood up, tears drying on her cheeks. The Walk of Worlds? Could that be what he was talking about? I would guess so. Have you ever traveled all the way to the end? No, Drew said. Perhaps the end of the Walk of Worlds is where you will find Penny. And that thing, too. The thing Penny wants to control. Yes, Penny will need to go there to finish doing what he wants to do. That's where you'll find him. It makes sense that it will be at the end of the Walk of Worlds. Since it'll be the end of the world. The Goloff chuckled. You think you're speaking in metaphor, but you're not, clever girl. I'll need to be able to tell what he lies about, too. I can detect lies, but it's not what I'm best at, Drew said. Your friend James is excellent at detecting lies. Imhotep said I should take someone who was better at it than me, but he said that it would kill him. I can't take him to the end of the Walk of Worlds. Why don't you let him make that decision for himself? He wants to kill Penny because Penny killed his brother, Drew said. He'll be reckless. Yes, and he does not possess the power that you do. He is a free being, though, and deserves the chance to make the decision for himself. I don't know if I can protect him if I take him there. You almost certainly won't, and he'll almost certainly die. But he will fulfill his duty to you and reveal what Penny lies about. That I can see for sure. So I can bring him with me, knowing he won't survive, so he can tell me when Penny lies? That is one way to describe it, the Goloff said. He sounded amused, she thought. I can't do that, Drew said. That is not true. You most certainly can do it. Then I don't want to do it, Drew said. That is more accurate. If you explain the risk to him and he still wants to go, I don't see where you would bear any responsibility. He doesn't know what it's like. He has no idea what he will be getting into. I don't have a good idea myself. Then don't inform him of what you were told by Imhotep. No, I won't do that. That would make me, well, a lot like your father, the Goloff said. Yes, Drew said. Allow him to make the best decision he can with the information he has available, the Goloff said, just as you were doing. I don't know, Drew said. You know that you must destroy Penny to fulfill your duty. To destroy Penny, you must allow your friend to be killed. That is the sort of thing your father struggled with early in his career. So you're saying I don't have a choice, Drew said. Of course you have a choice. You could allow humanity to die. This would include your friend. Or allow Penny to do what he wants to do. Would that be such a bad thing, really? Drew asked. The Goloff seemed to consider it. Yes, it would. It would interfere with the development of the entire universe. Penny is not a god, no matter how powerful he is or how powerful he becomes. He's not all-knowing. If he succeeds, humanity will be warped and distorted beyond recognition if it still exists at all. Which is the same thing that will happen if Penny doesn't do anything to this thing and we just leave it alone, right? It'll pass close enough to the Earth to change everything. Yes, either way, the outcome will not be favorable to humanity. Drew sighed again. Okay, I guess I need to talk to James now. That would be advisable, the Goloff said. Drew got up to leave, and as she was at the door, it spoke again. Drew? She paused, turning back to see it still regarding her with those big eyes with the scarred lids. I can't foresee the outcome. I do know that it will be difficult, and one way or another, nothing will be the same again no matter what happens. Really, Drew said, smiling slightly for the first time in what seemed like years to her. I wish you well, child. If you survive this, you will become a legend. Good to know, Drew said, turning and going up the corridor. Lala was waiting by the door to her father's rooms when she got back. Will you be wanting dinner, ma'am? She asked. Drew paused in the act of unlocking the door. No, I don't think I'm very hungry. Thank you, Lala. Very well, ma'am, Lala said, curtsying again and walking away. Drew went inside and realized as she saw her father's neatly made bed that it had been a couple of days since she'd slept. She considered going up the hall to her own rooms, but decided she needed to stop thinking of this as her father's rooms now. They were hers. She needed to use them. She glanced at the globes around the bed, noting with relief that none of them were flashing. She checked the one where she'd fought the alien and saw that it was still a dark brown. No change. She didn't bother to change clothes. She just took off her shoes and lay down, deciding she'd move some clothes from her old rooms into this one later. She closed her eyes, turning on her side, feeling a comforting, throbbing power that always swirled about the bed. It didn't take long for her to go to sleep. She entered into a dream within minutes after closing her eyes. She was in a room with a lot of computers. Most of them were off, and the room was dark except for one place where the screen was flickering. A woman sat in front of it, looking at the screen. The woman was wearing a white coat, her hair done up in a bun, and she had a notebook and a pen on her desk next to the computer screen. The paper in the notebook was covered with writing, some of it numbers, some of it questions. There was one that seemed to be the most pressing one, written at the bottom page of the page and underlined twice. What is it? The woman was dozing, Drew thought, and had been sitting there working for a long time. Drew peeked over the woman's shoulder at her computer screen. It was an image of the approaching alien creature she knew, though not a very clear one. She felt like the woman was a scientist, an astronomer probably, and she'd seen the thing and was studying it. The woman stirred in her chair, jerking awake, and Drew stepped back. The woman spun in her chair and looked at her. Who are you? She asked. How'd you get in here? You can see me? Drew asked. Of course I can see you. This is a secure area. How did you get past security? I'm not actually here, Drew said, deciding then that this wasn't actually a dream, but some sort of out-of-body experience that her father's, or rather her, bed decided to give her. What do you mean? The woman asked. You've seen it, haven't you? Drew asked, nodding at the screen. That thing that's out there. It's actually there? The woman asked. The deep space radar results are so strange, like it's there, but it isn't. Do you know anything about it? Not as much as I'd like, Drew said. I'm trying to convince the society that it's either going to collide with us or come extremely close to a collision soon, but nobody seems to be listening. Too bad, Drew said. Who did you say you were? The woman asked. Drew smiled. She decided that she could swim in the air, and she felt her power working to make it so. She pushed off with her toes, waving her arms, and felt her feet leave the floor, the ceiling of the room approaching. She went right through it. Wait, the woman crawled. What? She stopped, and Drew knew the woman had actually finally awakened instead of dreaming that she had awakened and could no longer see her. Drew knew she'd decided their encounter was some sort of strange dream and never mention it. She emerged through the roof of the building. It was night, and the moon was full. She could feel the approaching creature just to one side of the moon and decided to see if she could take a look at it. She had no problems getting higher and higher in the air. Each stroke of her arm seemed to propel her for a long way, and the earth was falling away below her. She knew she wouldn't have any problems breathing in space. She didn't need to breathe at all. She wasn't actually there. As she emerged from the atmosphere, she felt something tickling her mind. Someone was nearby with a little bit of the power. She looked around and saw a satellite, a big one, and she could tell there were people inside of it. She came over, peeking into one of the windows. A man was looking out, and he was the source of the power she'd felt. He had a trace of her ability. When she pressed her face to the window, he jerked away the power he had, allowing him to see her even though he was awake. He stared at her, his eyes bulging, shocked, and she waved at him and smiled before kicking herself away. She still had a long way to go. She reached the moon after a few minutes, then passed it, glancing back to see it below her, the earth rising above it. She kicked and stroked her way towards where she felt the alien thing. Finally, she could see it. It looked like a star, a big one. She couldn't tell anything else about it, except it radiated a strange power that to her felt wrong. Closer and closer, until she could start to make out what the thing looked like. It was inside of some nearly transparent shell, like an egg. It was coiled up, and she could see a mass of tentacles, claws, and what may have been a scale-covered arm or leg. It was massive, about a third the size of the moon, she thought. It was asleep, and she could feel its power, stirred by its dreams. As she got closer, she felt it, stronger and stronger. Its power was more than any she'd ever experienced before. Much more powerful even than Penny, she thought. It wasn't even close. It was also alien. The thoughts and dreams that it was projecting were strange and terrifying. She could feel it warp in space as it passed through, changing it forever. She could feel the damage it would do if it got close enough to the earth. It was powerful enough to radiate throughout all of the world she was responsible for. Nothing would survive if she didn't do something about it. Yet, in spite of that power, she didn't feel that the thing actually cared about the damage it was going to inflict, one way or another. It wouldn't even notice. Drew didn't want to get too close, afraid that even in her dream state it might be able to harm her. Quickly she reached out, trying to detect Penny and not finding any trace of him anywhere. She hung there in the middle of space for a while longer before willing herself to leave, to return home to her new bed. She sat up, looking around the room, not knowing where she was there in the darkness. Then she remembered. She took a few slow, deep breaths before lying back down and going back into a normal, dreamless sleep. Chapter 31. Drew awakened the next morning and found breakfast waiting for her, left in a room by Lala, who had apparently come in and left it on the table without waking her. Drew ate it, not really tasting the pancakes or the orange juice. When she finished, she took a shower and got dressed, still not sure what she was going to do next or how she actually felt. She stood in front of the door to the Walk of Worlds. She took a deep breath, her power working, and, with trembling hands, opened the door. The path was there as usual, and she stepped off onto it. Unlike her next trip on this path, this time she didn't have very far to go. Finding the right world was easy, and she stepped into it, feeling like it was late summer and it had been raining. It was cloudy, and she was in a place near a city where there were old houses. The recent rain had left the sidewalks and the streets damp and kept most people inside. She walked a few blocks in this suburban area, people driving by in their cars or passing her on the sidewalk, glancing at her without really seeing her. It was how she wanted it. She found the house she was looking for without really thinking all that much about it. Her feet just went through a combination of steps until she found herself across the street from it in the damp gray morning. There was a tricycle in the front yard, left there overnight, covered with rain that had ended just recently. There was a dirty tennis ball, like something a dog would play with. There was a new car parked in the driveway, a station wagon. The place next to it was empty, but it hadn't been that way for very long. Drew took a slow, quiet breath before reaching out to probe the house with her power. There were 3 people in there. 2 were children. One was very young, the owner of the tricycle she knew. A boy, about 4 years old, eating cereal. There was another child, older, a girl, almost 12, who was also eating cereal. She was gulping it down quickly, and Drew felt she was late for school. Drew could sense a dog there, too, a big one just grown out of puppyhood and loving his family. The third person was Mary, Drew's mother. Tears started in her eyes when she felt that familiar presence there, sitting at a table with her children, Drew's mother, Drew's brother and sister, or half-brother and sister. The owner of the other car, the one that occupied the place next to the station wagon, was their father. He lived there with Mary and the children. Drew could sense them all getting up from the table and knew they were heading for the door to leave for school, preschool, and work. Drew wanted to run, turn away before she actually saw Mary again, but she couldn't move, couldn't turn her head, couldn't even close her eyes. The door opened and they all came out, gathering around the car, climbing inside, the girl buckling her brother into his car seat in the back. They were all laughing and talking, beginning their day. Mary opened the driver's side door and was about to get in when she paused and looked across the street. For a moment, she was looking directly into Drew's eyes. "Mom," Drew whispered, forgetting that she had cast a glamour that kept anyone from noticing her. But it seemed like Mary had noticed her just for a moment before she looked away and got into the car, slamming the door. Like the connection between her and Drew still existed in spite of all the time that had gone by. As the car started and backed out of the driveway, Drew decided that her father was wise to forbid her from doing this. As she turned to go back to Margin Corps, she knew, even though he'd never said anything about it, that he'd done the right thing. Drew returned to Margin Corps, finding Lala gathering up her breakfast dishes. She asked Lala to have someone send to the village for James. She spent the time waiting for him, sitting and reading some of the books her father had left in the room. After an hour or so, there was a knock on the door, and she knew James had arrived. "Come in," she called, and the door opened, James entering, Lala showing him in. "You've been gone a long time," James said as Lala stood by the door. "How long?" Drew asked. 3 months. Drew looked at Lala. "You didn't say anything about that when I got in last night," Drew said. "You were sad and tired," Lala said. "It isn't unusual for the sorcerer to be gone for longer than that, too, ma'am." "I see," Drew said. "Thanks, Lala. Please let me speak to James alone, but stay close. I may want to talk with you in a bit." "Have I done something wrong, ma'am?" Lala asked. "No, I just need to tell you something." "Very good, ma'am." Lala curtsied and left, pulling the door closed, and Drew could sense her settling down onto the floor across the hall from the doorway, waiting to be recalled. Drew nodded at the chair across from her at the table, the one she'd sat in previously while her father occupied the chair she was using. James settled into it. "It's true, then?" he asked. "Mr. Winston is dead?" "Yes," Drew said. "I'm afraid it is. How did you hear?" "Word gets out quickly, especially about something like that. The Inklings hear it first somehow, and they usually tell the humans." "I see," Drew said again. She sighed, mostly to cover her reluctance to say what she needed to say. James said nothing, watching her, and she knew he was aware of what she was doing, of the sudden awkwardness. "I need you to take a trip with me," she finally said. "Where are we going?" He leaned back in the chair and smiled, and she guessed he was thinking it would be fun. To the end of the Walk of Worlds. Sounds like fun, James said, confirming her suspicions. It won't be. This isn't a vacation, James. There are some things I need to tell you about it first. I'm listening. The further down the road we go, the more time will pass here. We're going all the way to the end, so it might be several years. That's not a problem, James said. I can also tell you that you won't survive, Drew said, watching his reaction. He looked at her. How do you know that? He asked. I've been told by those who can foretell the future, Drew said. You don't have to come with me. If you don't go, you don't die. Why would you need me in the first place? He asked. I need someone who can sense a lie. I've been told that will be the key when I encounter... She paused, finally realizing that once he learned the identity of the person she was going to look for, there would be no way he would decline. Well, when I encounter the person I'm looking for. She finished it lamely, and she knew he could tell she was deliberately hiding something from him. How will that be the key? He asked. I'm not sure. You're going after Penny, aren't you? Drew sighed. Yes, she said. Knowing there would be no point in lying to him. She could feel his power up and running, and vaguely offended that he'd felt the need to detect a lie with her. Another part of her, though, knew she would have done the same thing if she were in his position. Do you know how? He asked. No, Drew said. I just know that you won't make it back if you come with me. Look, I can do the same thing you can do. I may not need you there at all. I'd hate to have you come with me and get yourself killed when it was unnecessary. Your ability to detect lies isn't as good as mine, James said. You know that. True, Drew said. You don't know anybody else who is as good at it as I am. Also true. And I swore that I would avenge my brother's death, James said. Drew nodded. That's what worries me, James. This isn't just about confronting and destroying Penny. It's a lot more complicated. He killed my brother. I don't see why that's complicated. There's something else going on. An alien creature that he wants to control. It's enormously powerful, and it'll destroy mankind if we don't do something about it. What are you going to do about that? I don't know. I've seen it. It's indescribable. It's very powerful. More powerful than you, me, and Penny all put together. We may not beat it. There's a possibility that neither of us will make it back. If you fail, it'll wipe out humanity. It'll either destroy humanity or warp it beyond all recognition, Drew said. Then I haven't changed my mind, James said. I'll still go with you. Okay, Drew said. Lala, could you come in here now? She called. Lala was still in the hallway, and she entered the room without knocking. Yes, ma'am, she asked, lowering her eyes. I know that you know James, don't you? Of course, ma'am. You know where his talent lies? He can detect falsehoods, ma'am. Drew felt Lala was beginning to feel fear. Lala, I didn't call you in here to question you. James is going to serve as a witness to what I'm about to say. I want you to tell the other Inklings, and James will verify what I say is true. I'm listening, ma'am, Lala said, and Drew felt the Inklings' relief. Lala, I'm freeing the Inklings. You are no longer required to serve the Sorcerer. Ma'am, serving the Sorcerer is our purpose, Lala said. That was your original purpose, but you've grown since then. You have a life of your own. No one should enslave you. I hope you will continue to serve the Sorcerer, but if you do, it will be as someone who chooses to. Tell the other Inklings, too. Ma'am, are you certain of this? Lala asked. Yes. James, she looked over at him. She speaks true, he said. Lala, I know you know which Inklings were planning a rebellion against a sorcerer who were going to fight for their freedom. That fight is over. The sorcerer will protect Inklings as well as humanity because of your generations of service, but you are no longer required to serve. If you do so, it will be as an employee, and you will be paid for your service and treated with the respect you deserve as a free and self-determinate being. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. She could feel Lala's great joy. I'm about to go on a long mission. I may be gone several years. I may never return. If I do return, I hope to find Inklings here maintaining Majid-Kor as always, but only because that's what they want to do. What if you never return? Who will enforce your will? Lala asked. If I don't return, the line of sorcerers will be dead and you'll be free anyway, Drew said. I see, ma'am, Lala said, and the hint of insolence in her tone made Drew smile slightly. Will you require my assistance to prepare for your journey? No, Drew said. That won't be necessary. Thank you, ma'am, Lala said. Go and tell your people. James and I will be leaving soon, Drew said. Lala curtsied. Thank you, ma'am, she said, leaving, closing the door. James looked at her, smiling. Are you sure that was a good idea? Your father relied heavily on the Inklings. They'll still be reliable even if they're free, Drew said. Even if they aren't, it's still wrong. If you say so. James didn't sound entirely convinced, Drew thought. Are you ready to go? She asked. In a bit. Do you have any food? I'm starting to get a bit hungry. Drew left James there after they finished breakfast. The big closet had a selection of weapons and armor, and she felt James looking it over, trying to decide what he could carry on their trip. She went up to the roof and walked to the edge facing the village and the ocean. The sun was up and there was a slight breeze. She could smell smoke from the village, the people there cooking their own breakfast or burning logs in their fireplaces against a slight chill. There was a dragon far out to sea, flying on one of those mysterious errands the creatures ran, and Drew reached out to it with her power, finally touching it. There was a mind there, powerful, wise, and strong, and she could sense its surprise at having been touched. Quickly she withdrew, letting the creature continue on its way. She didn't want to interfere with its life. If she failed, she knew it would be having enough problems. She felt suddenly that she was no longer alone, and she turned to see a tall, heavily robed figure with a hood covering its head standing a few feet away behind her. Her power surged towards it, but she could tell that, even though she could see it, it wasn't actually there. The figure lowered the hood, and she was not surprised to see Penny's face, his expression solemn. I heard about your father, he said. I'm sorry. He wouldn't be dead if it weren't for you, Drew said. She noticed that she could see through the figure a little bit and wondered why. She knew he could make himself appear as solid as if he were really there. I know. I said I'm sorry. It's not enough. Drew, I know you're getting ready to attack me. Trust me, it won't work. You aren't strong enough. Penny, I promised Father I'd destroy you. Father's dead now. I'm no longer bound by my word to him. Give me your word that you'll stop this plan you have to use this creature to increase your power. You no longer need to protect yourself. There's nothing in the universe that is strong enough to harm you now. Stop this plan, and I promise I will not come after you. You don't understand, Drew. I'm going to eliminate all the things that make this world so dangerous. No more disease. No more wars. No more creatures that look to prey on us. I'm going to unmake them all. You have no idea what that will do, Drew said. So? How could it be any worse? It could very easily be worse, Drew said. Penny, this is your last chance. Promise me that you will give up on this plan, that you'll just live your life without harming anybody else, and I will not come after you. You have nothing to fear from me. Penny laughed. I have nothing to fear from you now, he said. Then why did you come here? To tell you I'm sorry about your father, and in a hope to persuade you to join me. It's not too late. If you're so powerful, you don't need me, Drew said. Well, that's true, but having you would make it a lot easier. No, Penny, you can stop asking me. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to destroy you. I'll have to destroy you then. I thought I was the one person in the universe who was safe from you, Drew said. You were. Not anymore. I figured that out. When I succeed in what I'm going to do, I can remake you, too, like it never happened. That's why you weren't all that worried about me when you made that trap. Yes, I thought you'd probably survive it, but even if you didn't, I could make it so that it wouldn't matter. Okay, Penny, just so I'm clear, since you refuse to stop with this plan of yours, I have no choice but to find you and destroy you. There is no more point in talking about it. Understood, Penny said, bowing his head, pulling the hood back over it as his image vanished. She stood there, feeling the chilly breeze, and noticed that she was sweating. James came out of the door of the stairway to the landing she'd used. He was wearing a stiff leather breastplate fastened over his shirt. A long sword hung from a scabbard at his hip. Who were you talking to? He asked. Drew couldn't help but smile. Just myself. Do you know how to use that? She asked, nodding at the sword. James grinned. Of course, he said. He drew the sword. I used to fence with Gerald all the time. He was a great swordsman. I learned a lot from him. Let me see it, Drew said. He handed her the blade, and she waved it around like she'd seen actors do in movies. She realized then that it was the first time she'd actually held a sword. She focused her power on the blade, and it flickered, a bluish light tracing the edge and the tip. She handed it back to him. I just enchanted it. It won't break, and it won't get dull. Please don't cut yourself with it. She smiled as she said it, and he took the blade and slid it back into its sheath. Are you ready? He asked. Yes. Let's go. Hello, this is J. Franklin Evans. Thank you for listening to this episode of Stories That Suck. Did it suck? Let me know. Be sure to like and subscribe.